This episode is not for comfort. This is your trigger warning. Not the internet kind, the metaphysical kind. The kind that sits at the back of your throat like a lump of truth you were never meant to swallow. Today we are not discussing a philosopher, we are summoning one. Georges Bataille was less a thinker and more a rupture, a psychic wound stitched together with sacred obscenity. He was laughter, death, and the black ink of annihilation. He was the heretic priest of the 20th century, baptizing language in blood, semen, and grief. Imagine if Nietzsche fucked a cathedral and their child crawled out howling about the ecstasy of waste. That child would be Georges Bataille. Most philosophy wants to save you, to fix you, to lift you out of the dirt and into the light. Bataille hands you a shovel and tells you to dig deeper, not to bury the body, but to find yourself under it. For him, the sacred wasn't up in the clouds. It was in the soil, in the slit throat, in the orgasm that felt too big for your body to hold. He didn't care for systems. He cared for ruptures. He believed that to be human is to break, and that the breaking itself is holy. This episode is about the unspeakable, about the sacred in the perverse, the divine in the useless, the freedom in laughing at God while you light the altar on fire. We'll talk about Bataille's war on rationality, his obsession with limit experiences, his philosophy of waste and sacrifice, his hunger for death, for loss, for meaning through unmeaning. You're not here to agree, you're here to feel. So if you're ready to abandon reason at the door and step barefoot into the cathedral of excess, welcome. Light a candle, or don't. Bataille would say the flame means nothing, and because of that, it means everything. Let's begin. 835. If you want to understand Georges Bataille, don't start with his books. Start with his body. Start with the trembling child who watched his father's mind disintegrate like wet paper. Start with the blind man, his father, screaming in a chair, paralyzed, angry, godless, flinging curses into a household where every room smelled like illness and impending death. The young Georges was raised on this steady diet of rot and entropy. His father, syphilitic and vicious. His mother, neurotic and fearful. And the boy wanted to be a priest, not because he believed in God, but because he wanted to kneel before something bigger than the chaos, because he wanted to make meaning from the screaming. But there was no God. Not for Bataille, not really. Only the scream, only the breakdown, and he would spend the rest of his life crawling through that wreckage, searching for something sacred inside the wreckage itself. Born in 1897, France, post-Victorian Europe, clinging to its rationality like a drunk clutches a Bible. But Bataille was born upside down, born for the rot beneath civilization's skin. He wasn't a philosopher, he wasn't a theologian. He was a contamination, an intellectual infection, and he knew it. He tried the church first. That makes sense, doesn't it? Where else do you go when your father is a howling lunatic and your mother worships fear like it's divine? You run to God, or at least to his empty house. He studied for the priesthood, loved the rituals, the genuflections, the pageantry. But underneath that, he was already hallucinating the sacred. Not in the resurrection, not in the Eucharist, but in death, in sex, in eyes gouged out, in blood flowing like wine. The sacred wasn't in heaven. It was leaking out of every wound on earth. And so he left the church, or maybe the church left him. Maybe the walls cracked around him and the crucifix snapped into a pair of legs. He became a librarian. Imagine that, this chaos engine of a man archiving knowledge in a quiet building full of rules. A perfect disguise. But by night, he was writing things that no respectable philosopher could even read without feeling soiled. Pornography disguised as theology. Theology disguised as pornography. He'd write essays on mysticism and death. He was always both and neither, sacred and obscene, high and low, a theologian of the gutter. And the surrealists, they couldn't stand him, which is saying something. These were artists painting melting clocks and masturbating statues, but even they said no thanks to Bataille. Why? Because he wasn't doing surrealism for style. He was doing it like a ritual disembowelment. His art wasn't metaphor, it was self-sacrifice. He didn't paint nightmares, he lived in them. He published journals, documents, critiques, acephalae, strange hybrid beasts of intellectual thought and poetic madness. One issue might contain an essay on animality next to a dissection of a ritual sacrifice, next to a photo of a dead man mid-execution, face contorted in something between agony and orgasm. That image, if you know Bataille you know it, was the Ling Chi photograph, the death by 1,000 cuts, a man torn apart alive. And Bataille didn't just publish this photo, he worshipped it. He described his reaction to it as orgasmic. In that man's face, he saw the perfect fusion, pain and ecstasy, suffering and transcendence. The real sacred, not the sanitized smiling Christ, but the screaming truth, the unbearable moment when self dissolves and something bigger devours you. That's what he was chasing, always. That moment where the I falls away, where identity burns, where meaning stops being something you know and becomes something you feel through your skin like fire. He believed in limit experiences, situations that push you so far past your normal frame of reference that you collapse. Not in despair, but in awe, terror, rapture, call it what you want, but it destroys the ego, the little self. And once that's gone, what's left isn't you anymore. It's something sacred, not because it's good, but because it's beyond. But this man, this mind, he wasn't a masochist in the way we think. He wasn't just chasing pain for its own sake. He was chasing truth. Truth not as idea, but truth as breakdown. You want to understand Bataille? And try this. Imagine biting into something rotten, and instead of spitting it out, you let the juice drip down your chin. You swallow it, because deep down you know something sacred lives in that decay. That's Bataille. That's the kind of philosopher he was. He lost people, all the time. He lost his mind more than once. He suffered from anxiety so intense it broke him. He wrote in fragments because he was a fragment. His life was a series of unhealed wounds, failed loves, illness, depression, and yet he chose to go deeper into the suffering. Not to escape it, but to use it. To turn his own pain into a theology, his own breakdown into a method. He believed that we come closest to the sacred when we are undone. Not when we're stable, not when we're safe, but when we're cracked open and bleeding light. So, who was Georges Bataille? He was a man who looked at the void and laughed. A man who saw the sacred not in the church but in the strip club, in the war zone, in the corpse, in the eye dilated with terror and lust. He was not rational, he was radical. He made philosophy out of orgasms and theology out of vomit. He believed that truth cannot be known, only experienced. And to experience it, you have to die a little, or a lot. For Georges Bataille, the sacred isn't the safe space with soft lighting and chanting monks. It's not the cathedral that soothed you, or the clean white space where gods go to die in peace. No, the sacred is sticky. It stinks of flesh and iron and fluid. It lingers under your fingernails. It's the scream in the middle of a funeral that nobody dares to acknowledge. If you're still holding on to some rational idea that the sacred is something pretty, something transcendent, in the Hallmark card sense, drop it, right now. Rip it up and throw it in the fire. Because in Bataille's universe, the sacred is not clean. It's the exact opposite. The sacred is what breaks you. The sacred is what ruins you. And nowhere does this idea bleed through more than in his work Inner Experience. Bataille published Inner Experience in 1943, mid-World War II. People are starving, cities are crumbling, humanity is on fire. And what does he do? He writes a book about ecstasy. Not joy, not happiness, not pleasure. Ecstasy. The kind that tears you apart. The kind you don't come back from with the same shape. The kind that splits you open and lets something other rush in. He doesn't define it clearly because ecstasy, by definition, escapes clarity. It's not something you talk about, it's something that happens to you. And that's the point of the book. It's not philosophy in the classic sense, it's a map of wreckage, a record of his own limit experiences. It reads like a man confessing, not teaching, not enlightening, just laying his guts out and saying, here, this is what it looked like when I shattered. The need to go astray, to be destroyed, is an extremely private, distant, passionate, turbulent truth. Think about that. The need to go astray, to be destroyed. Bataille doesn't just accept self-destruction, he worships it. Not because he's depressed and not because he's nihilistic, but because in destruction he sees something sacred. A confrontation with what lies beyond the self, beyond thought, beyond coherence. And this is where things get a little damp. Because for Bataille, death isn't something that happens at the end. It's something we touch in moments of total surrender. And nowhere is that surrender more profound, more terrifying and more sublime than in sex. Not sex as reproduction, not even sex as pleasure, but sex as dissolution, as obliteration. The French call orgasm le petit mort, the little death. And Bataille built an entire theology out of that. He believed eroticism is the gateway to death. Not because it kills us, literally, but because it undoes us. In the moment of climax, your body stops being yours, your identity collapses, you scream, you twitch, you go blank. And in that blankness, that void, that flicker of self-evaporation, you meet something that feels holy. Eroticism, it may be said, is assenting to life up to the point of death. Assenting, submitting, saying yes. Up to the point where you stop being you. That's where the sacred lives. The more you read Bataille, the more the words start to fall apart. He's not just writing about disintegration, he's performing it on the page in real time. His sentences begin like ideas and end like prayers, or seizures, or screams. Because here's the thing. Language is a structure. Language is order. Language is the suit and tie we put on over our raw animal skin. And Bataille, he wants to rip that suit off. Language can't touch the sacred, it can only fail in front of it. And that failure, that moment when words break down, that's where you glimpse the sacred. For Bataille, to write about the sacred honestly is to break language open, to let it bleed on the page. This is why inner experience reads like a diary kept during a possession. It's not meant to be clear, it's meant to infect you. It's meant to pull you out of the neat world of cause and effect and drop you into something raw. Bataille is often called a mystic, but he didn't believe in God. Not really. At least not a God you could point to. No sky father, no savior, no 10 commandments. What he did believe in was the sacred, but not as something given, as something felt, something that breaks you, something that undoes your identity. He once said, God is the absence of God. That's his mysticism in a single line. It's not about faith, it's about experience. An experience that goes so far past what the self can comprehend that all that's left is trembling, tears, laughter, silence. He wanted to build a theology without theology, a religion without belief, a sacredness born from suffering, not salvation. And this leads us to one of the strangest, most chilling projects Bataille ever conceived, Acephale, a secret society, a philosophy journal, a god with no head. Acephale, French for headless, because the head is the symbol of reason, of order, of control. And to be sacred, Bataille believed, we have to lose our heads. He and a small group of followers would gather in the woods, perform rituals, contemplate human sacrifice. Yes, real sacrifice. They wanted to kill one of their own, to truly experience the sacred, to confront death not as a concept but as presence. They volunteered, one after the other, but no one could bring themselves to do it. The rituals went unfulfilled. But the intention remains one of the most intense philosophical statements ever made, that real sacredness requires blood, that there are truths which cannot be known, only bled for. You know how Bataille ends inner experience, not with conclusions, not with solutions, with tears, with laughter, because when you've gone so far into the abyss that the abyss laughs back, what else is there? He once wrote, I cry, I laugh. I do not know if I cry more than I laugh or if I laugh more than I cry. The tears and the laughter are the same, and each is worth the other. The one contains the other, even in the moments when they are the most separate. This is the sacred for Bataille, not a resolution, not a clean end, but a trembling contradiction, joy and sorrow fused, agony and rapture entangled. So why does this matter? Why talk about sex, death and silence in the middle of a world that prefers swipeable content and 10-point lists? Because in a time where the sacred has been sterilized, where religion has become commodity, where philosophy has become productivity advice, Bataille stands like a ruined monument in the desert, screaming, laughing, bleeding, reminding us that some truths aren't safe, that some forms of love aren't clean, that to experience the sacred you might have to lose your name, your ego, your coherence. You might have to come undone. And in that undoing, you don't become nothing. You become more than you, more than meaning, a pulsing wound in the shape of God. If you've made it this far, congratulations. You've reached the part of the episode where Georges Bataille throws a Molotov cocktail at the economy. Not just any economy, your economy. Your neat little mental spreadsheet, your 401k, your life plan in Google Calendar. If you've ever felt guilty for doing nothing, if you've ever looked at something beautiful and thought, but what's the point? This next part is about you. Georges Bataille's economic masterpiece is called The Accursed Share. And like all things Bataille, it's a trap disguised as a theory. It pretends to be about money, but it's actually about soul. The basic thesis is that every system, whether it's ecological, biological, or economic, produces excess, extra, overflow, waste. And what we do with that excess determines whether we live or whether we rot from the inside out. You see, we've been trained like Pavlovian hamsters to believe that the goal of life is accumulation. Grow, save, invest, and hoard. But Bataille throws a funeral for that idea. Because he says, growth is not the goal. The goal is expenditure. And not just any expenditure. Not the kind where you buy something on sale and tell yourself it was a good investment. No. Bataille is interested in what he calls unproductive expenditure, which means spending without return, giving without expecting, sacrifice, destruction. Think a party so wild you burn down the house. Think a ritual where you slaughter a bull just to feed the gods. Think building a pyramid not for utility but because it's there, and the pharaoh's soul demands to be housed in excess. Bataille splits the world into two economies. The restricted economy, and this is the world of accounting, the world you and I live in most of the time. The restricted economy asks, how much can I earn? What's the return on this action? How do I maximize output and minimize waste? That's your job, your bank, your Instagram hustle. But Bataille was after the general economy, the cosmic economy, the kind of economy the sun operates on. The sun doesn't save energy, it wastes it, constantly. It throws light at the earth not because it wants something back, but because that's what it does. The sun is the perfect model of sacrifice. The sun gives, the sun dies, and in that death it feeds the world. You're trying to hoard your light. That's why you're dying on the inside. Bataille believed that when we try to trap the sacred, or when we try to repackage ecstasy into profit, we rot. And society starts to crack at the seams. Let's go back, way back. Before banks, before interest. Let's talk about the potlatch. Indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest used to have these extravagant ritualistic gatherings. Potlatch wasn't about trading. It wasn't about profit. It was about status through waste. Chiefs would gather their wealth, food, blankets, tools, even slaves, and then destroy it, burn it, throw it in the ocean, give it away with no expectation of return. The more you gave, the more respected you were, because only those truly rich in spirit could afford to waste. Sound insane? Bataille thought it was genius. Because potlatch wasn't a glitch in the system, it was a challenge to the entire idea of systems. A war of gifts, a sacred duel of who can bleed the most without asking why. But what happens when a society forgets how to waste sacredly? It starts to waste violently. War, according to Bataille, is what happens when a system refuses to release its excess in meaningful ways. The energy builds, the tension tightens, the surplus grows, and eventually it explodes. That's what war is. Not strategy, not defense. War is waste. Human life, resources, cities, sacrificed in a blood ritual we pretend is political. And don't forget luxury. The gleaming palace, the cruise ship, the mansion with 14 bathrooms for a family of 2. Bataille would say, this is what sacred expenditure without spirit looks like. It's hollow, it's obscene, because it wastes without meaning. It spills without sacrifice, it bleeds but doesn't pray. For Bataille, the only way out of this is to remember that true life, the sacred ecstatic kind, is found in the act of sacrifice, not the burnt offering of someone else. Your own, your time, your energy, your body, your art. But you don't do it for applause. You do it because the act is the meaning. This is why Bataille loved art, festivals, rituals, and yes, sex. Because they're the few places in modern life where excess can still live. Think of the concert that becomes church, the painting that took 5 years and sold for nothing, the lover who gives their entire self to the moment. These are holy acts of waste, because they serve no purpose but the moment itself. Let's fast forward to you, to now. You sitting at your desk, you counting calories, dollars, likes. You wondering if what you just posted was worth it. Here's Bataille knocking on your skull like it's a church door. What are you hoarding? What are you afraid to waste? Your creativity, your vulnerability, your time with no return? Ask yourself, what would happen if you stopped trying to optimize your life and started trying to sacrifice it for something beautiful? What if your purpose isn't to accumulate, but to give away everything you are until all that's left is the sacred scream of surrender? Bataille doesn't offer peace, he offers fire. Not the fire of destruction, the fire of offering. The fire that says, I will burn not because it's efficient, but because it's holy. The fire that says, I will pour myself out until I'm empty, not because I'm broken, but because I've remembered what I'm for. That's the accursed share. That's the economics of ecstasy. Blood, not balance sheets. Presence, not return on investment. The sacred loss of something you never truly owned. You want to be free? Start with this. Find what you're most afraid to waste and offer it. This section is where it stops pretending to be philosophy. This is where it starts to feel like a fever. Like you're reading something out loud in a dream. And halfway through, the words stop making sense, but you keep reading anyway because your hands are bleeding and the book is warm like flesh. This is the part where Georges Bataille prays. Except there is no God. Or maybe there is, but Bataille won't define him, or her, or it. Because the moment you give the divine a face, you've already lost it. What he builds here is not a religion. It is a scream, a theology for people who don't believe in anything but still weep when they see the stars. A spirituality for those who stopped going to church years ago but still pause when they pass one at night. This isn't faith. This is vertigo. This is the sacred leaking out through a crack in the ceiling of the real. One of Bataille's most quoted lines is this: God is the absence of God. That line sounds like clever wordplay until you actually sit with it, until you let it unfold in the dark recesses of your mind. Because what he's saying is that the divine does not arrive wrapped in certainty. The divine is not the answer. The divine is the silence after the answer fails. Think about that. Not a God who explains, not a God who saves, a God who ruins your capacity to ask the question in the first place. For Bataille, God is not a being. God is not even an idea. God is the name we give to what remains when everything else collapses. Not a presence, but a gap. A rupture in meaning so total that all you can do is fall into it. And in that fall, something happens. Something Bataille never quite defines, because to define it would be to kill it. But we know it when it happens. We call it awe, we call it terror, we call it sacred, even if we don't believe in anything at all. In 1936, Bataille did something that was either completely unhinged or completely prophetic, probably both. He founded a secret society, not a book club, not an intellectual salon, a cult. It was called the Acephalae. Their symbol was a man without a head, sometimes drawn with a radiant heart in the place where the head should be, sometimes holding his severed skull in one hand like a sacrament. Why headless? Because the head represents reason, control, clarity, calculation. The head is what keeps society moving in straight lines and spreadsheets. Bataille wanted none of that. He believed the sacred could only be found when the head was cut off, when the rational mind was destroyed, when the thinking self stopped trying to make sense and just surrendered to the mystery. So he created rituals, meetings in woods, candles, circles, readings from Nietzsche. There are rumours they planned a sacrifice. One of the members volunteered to die, another volunteered to kill, but they couldn't do it. No one could cross that line, but maybe that refusal was the real sacrifice. The acknowledgement that the sacred is too big, too real, too holy to be acted out without trembling. That failure was part of the theology. That gap between desire and action is the exact space where the sacred lives. So what happens when you do reach the limit? When you walk to the edge of yourself and keep going? What do you find? Bataille gives us two answers. Not conclusions and not definitions, just two eruptions from the body. Tears and laughter. These are the sounds the body makes when the mind breaks down, when the categories fail, when meaning dissolves. The laughter that bursts out when you finally realize the world is both pointless and beautiful. The tears that fall when you touch something too vast to hold. Not joy, not sorrow, both at once. I said this earlier, as Bataille wrote, "I cry, I laugh. I do not know if I cry more than I laugh or if I laugh more than I cry." The tears and the laughter are the same, and each is worth the other. It's not a metaphor. It's the language of someone who has stood in the presence of the unknowable. And that presence tore him open. And what came out were not words. What came out was sounds, and those sounds were sacred. This is what theologians call negative theology. Apophatic theology, a way of speaking about God by saying what God is not. God is not good. God is not a father. God is not love. God is the refusal of every label. God is the failure of every definition. And that failure is the point. Because when you try to hold the infinite in words, the words snap. When you try to light the void with language, the flame goes out. And what remains in that darkness is holy. Not because it tells you the truth, but because it shows you that truth is not something that can be held. It can only be entered. Like a wound, like a mouth, like a grave, or like a God who cannot be known, only felt. So what does all of this mean to you? For the atheist, the skeptic, the one who ran from church but still dreams about it sometimes. It means you don't need belief to feel reverence. You don't need faith to kneel. You just need to experience, not just the light, the darkness too. The grief, the madness, the erotic dissolution of your identity. These are sacred not because someone told you they are sacred because they undo you. And in that undoing, you are reborn. Not into something better, not into something saved, but into something true. Bataille's theology is not a ladder to heaven. It is a descent into the flesh, into the filth, into the unbearable beauty of being alive for no reason at all. So here we are. You listening, me speaking, and Bataille still laughing, still crying, still praying to a God with no head, no name, and no answers. A God that lives in the moan, the scream, the orgasm, and the execution. A God that does not ask you to believe, only to feel. So if you've ever felt wonder in pain, or love in ruin, or meaning in the meaningless, then you already know what he knew. That the sacred is not above us, it is inside us, waiting to be shattered. So it can finally shine. You survived this far, that should count for something. 4 acts, 4 wounds, 4 masks ripped off the world one by one until what was left didn't even have a name anymore. You've walked with Bataille through his childhood madness, you've felt the sacred ooze through his erotic dissolutions, you've set fire to capitalism with his economics of waste, you've laughed and cried at his godless God. And now we arrive at the final question. Why does this matter? Why should anyone today in this algorithm-optimized apocalypse care about Georges Bataille? Especially if you hated him. Especially if you flinched through every line, rolled your eyes at the filth, winced at the execution, recoiled from the sex and the screaming and the divine static humming just beneath his words. Especially then. Georges Bataille is not a thinker who makes you feel good. He doesn't give you lessons to write in your bullet journal. He doesn't offer a 10-point guide to a more productive morning. He doesn't configure your soul for brand partnerships. He spits in your coffee and says, "Drink it anyway, bitch." And that is exactly why he matters. Because we are living in a time that is starving for real transgression. Not scandal, not controversy, transgression. The act of crossing a boundary that was never meant to be crossed. The sacred kind. The kind that doesn't sell. The kind that doesn't fit in a TED talk. The kind that costs you something. Bataille is the philosopher of transgression, of rupture, of sacred breakdown. And if you're brutally honest, you already know you need that. Because modern life is a fortress of control. Everything is data, everything's a product. Your pain, your pleasure, your beliefs, your time, all shrink-wrapped and monetized and fed back to you with a like button attached. Bataille shows up to that world and sets it on fire. He says, what if the most important parts of life can't be sold? What if meaning only emerges when you waste yourself on something that gives you nothing back? What if the sacred is buried in everything you've been told to avoid? We have sanitized philosophy. We've turned it into motivational quotes and clever tweets. But Bataille brings philosophy back to its true form. Dangerous thinking. Thinking that endangers the thinker. His writing doesn't invite you in. It dares you. It's dirty. It's dirty. It's incoherent. It's offensive. Makes you feel like you've opened a sacred text in the back of a butcher's shop. And that's the point. Because life isn't clean. Grief isn't clean. Orgasm isn't clean. Death isn't clean. Why should philosophy be? Why should we seek wisdom and clarity when the deepest truths have always been hidden in shadow? If there's one word that echoes through Bataille's entire body of work, it's sacred. Not in the church sense, certainly not in the family-friendly kind. The sacred as that which cannot be reduced. The sacred as what cannot be monetized, calculated, or explained. The sacred as the experience that breaks you. Ask yourself, when was the last time you experienced something sacred? Not something pleasant, not something impressive, something that made you tremble, something that silenced your mind, something that reminded you how small you are. That is what Bataille wanted to bring back. And we need that now more than ever. In a time when even spirituality is just another aesthetic, when even mindfulness is being sold as a productivity hack, we need someone to scream from the edge of the sacred and say, this isn't about control, this isn't about gain, this is about surrender. Bataille understood something that most thinkers avoid, that disintegration is not failure, that collapse is not the end of meaning, that some truths only arrive when the structure of your identity has crumbled. This is what he meant by inner experience. This is why he wrote about sacrifice, mysticism, death, and orgasm in the same breath. Because they all do the same thing. They all destroy the self. Not permanently, not in despair, but like fire to the forest, destruction that makes space for something new. And if you've ever had your life fall apart and found yourself more real on the other side of the wreckage, you already know what he's talking about. In The Accursed Share, Bataille builds an entire economic theory on this idea, that the most important things in life are useless. Art, ritual, sacrifice, play, grief, love. None of these things have a calculable return on investment. They are extravagant, wasteful, and that's exactly why they matter. Because they are where life reveals its fullness, not as a tool, not as a means to an end, but as an end in itself. In a world obsessed with utility, Bataille reminds us that the soul is a luxury. And if you do not learn how to waste yourself on something beautiful, you will forget what it means to be alive. Bataille is not for everyone, and he never wanted to be. He is for the ones who feel out of place in every system, the ones who look at the world and say, is this all there is? The ones who crave something deeper than pleasure and more dangerous than hope. The ones who don't want to be saved, but want to be changed. If you've ever wanted to scream in a cathedral or cry during sex or laugh during a funeral, Bataille is your philosopher. Not because he gives you permission, but because he shows you that you are not alone, that your chaos has meaning, that your disobedience is sacred, that your refusal to fit is not a flaw, it is your opening into something holy. So why does Georges Bataille still matter? Because he never tried to clean life up. He dove into it. Into the blood, into the filth, into the unbearable contradictions of being human. He never tried to fix the wound, he kissed it, and in doing so he turned pain into prayer, he turned waste into worship, he turned silence into a theology. And if nothing else, he reminds us that it is possible to live without answers, to cry and laugh at the same time, to kneel before a God you don't believe in simply because something in you still longs to kneel. Maybe you hate him. That's fine. Bataille never wanted your approval. He wanted your disintegration. He wanted to peel back the part of you that performs and get to the part of you that trembles. The real part, the sacred part, the part you've been taught to hide, the part that laughs when it should cry and cries when it should laugh. That part, that's the part Bataille wrote for. That's the part that still matters. But now we close the book. Or maybe we leave it open. Somewhere dark, somewhere soft. This has been an episode about Georges Bataille. But really, it hasn't. It's been an episode about you. About the parts of you that never show up to therapy. The parts that scream into pillows and laugh at funerals and wish they could kiss death on the mouth just once, just to know what it tastes like. We've walked through filth, but we found the sacred inside it. Not above it, not beyond it. Inside it. And maybe, if Bataille taught us anything, it's this. That the truth is never clean. That the sacred is not some shining light at the end of a hallway. It is the hallway itself, collapsing while you walk through it. It is the scream that turns into a song you've never heard but always known. If this was your first time encountering Bataille, I hope it hurt a little. I hope something inside you shifted. Not because he wants to break you, but because you are already breaking, and you've just never had permission to turn that collapse into communion. And that's what this was. Not a lecture. A communion of fractures. And now you can't go back. You've seen the headless God. You've heard the laughter that comes when language dies. You've tasted the waste that gives life its strange fullness. And once you've felt that, nothing can save you. No productivity app can resurrect you. No God who demands cleanliness will ever look holy again. Because now you know. Holiness is the blood. Holiness is the filth. Holiness is the burn of surrender. If that makes you cry, good. If that makes you laugh, even better. If people ask you what this episode was about, don't say it was about Bataille. Say it was about fire. Say it was about the part of you that's been trying to die and be reborn for years. Say it was about all the sacred moments that didn't make it to your Instagram feed. The ones too messy to share, too holy to explain. Say it was about the ecstasy you felt the first time you let go of control. Say it was about the day you finally realized that the voice screaming in your chest wasn't madness, it was prayer, and it just didn't know the words yet. The truth is that you don't need Bataille. You never did. You've already lived his philosophy. You lived it the first time you lost someone and didn't know how to grieve, so you just sat in silence until your skin felt like stone. You lived it the first time you touched someone and stopped knowing who you were. You lived it the first time you laughed while you were crying and for a second forgot which was which. Bataille is just the name we give to that strange permission. The permission to break without fixing. The permission to worship the unspeakable. The permission to say, this is who I am when I stop pretending I know what I am. And that version of you, the one without answers, that's the sacred one. That's the real you. That's the you that cannot be bought, that cannot be healed, that cannot be optimized, that can only be offered. Thank you, you beautiful lot, for coming on me. Fuck me, we got into Bataille too soon. Coming with me. Jesus Christ, that went dark. Should we start that again? Thank you, you beautiful lot, for coming with me on this little philosophical journey through Georges Bataille. A little bit like darker than usual, I get, but you know, this is Bataille. Like, if you ever come across him, ever read any of his books, you will understand that this is a dubious subject, but really worth talking about, I felt. So again, thank you. As always, if you want to comment on stuff, if you want to get involved in the discussion, I would love to hear from you. We have a website on Substack called theobservingeye.com. You can go and sign up to that if you fancy. And you can, comment on the episodes and get involved in the discussion. We do the social media thing, but I've not been doing it much of late because if you've listened to these podcasts before, you know I'm really not a fan of social media. So it is an effort. There is a deep procrastination in me to do social things, just in general, really. But yeah, so bear with me on that. I will try and put content out as much as I can. It goes in little fits and spurts normally. What else have I got to say? Where are we on social media? We're on Instagram, and we're on X, and we're on TikTok, and all with the same handle, @TheObservingEye. And we're on YouTube, which is youtube.com/@TheObservingEye as well. So that's where all of our videos live, if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. What else is there? I have an email address. This has been open for a while, and is open to all of you. So you can send me an email at david at theobservingeye.com if you want to talk philosophy, or if you have ideas about things that you'd like to see in future episodes, then obviously just drop me an email. I'll try and get back to them as soon as I can, which is normally within a day or so. That's it, I think. Thanks again, as always, for spending your time with me on this. I really do appreciate it, and it's nice to feel that, people are getting something out of this. So thank you. I deeply appreciate it. Take care, everybody. Much love, and I'll catch you soon.